Knox County families. I am so glad that you have joined me for the fourth grade week 2 science lesson. My name is Melissa Wall and I teach science and math at Hardin Valley Elementary. The lesson that I have prepared for us today is in the form of a PowerPoint. So if you'll bear with me for just a second, I'll get that pulled up for us. Now I'm in the corner. Hi. Okay, so as I said, this is grade 4, week 2, science. And the packets that accompany this video and all the videos can be found at the Knox County Schools website under the Student Resources tab. I have taken a screenshot of that for you so you can see what it looks like. And you can print the packets off from your house, or if you don't have access to a printer, you can pick the packets up at the meal distribution sites each week at the schools from 10 to 12. And if you need to look up where the meal distribution sites are located, you can find that on the Student Resource tab as well. So today's lesson is from Module 3, Earth and its Changing Features. Module 3 was one of our modules that we did at the beginning of the year, so this should be review. And our learning target says to communicate and provide examples of how physical weathering and the erosion processes change Earth's surface over a long period of time. So these are not going to be fast changes like from an earthquake or a volcano. These are going to be slow changes. And the standard that this comes from, I have listed below. So our essential question for today, the whole lesson, is going to be about what causes cracks in the street and the sidewalk. So this photograph right here is from my own driveway. And as you can see, there is a long crack that goes down the side, and there's a smaller crack over here, and it's bulging here and even over here. So what we're going to talk about today is what causes that. Now, when my driveway was first paved, it did not look like this. It was nice and smooth, and there were no cracks and no bulges, and this certainly didn't happen overnight. I did not walk out of my house one day to find it like this. So this happened slowly over time. What made it happen? Maybe you've been walking down the street on a sidewalk and you've seen some cracks and bulges like this. Have you ever noticed why or what caused that to happen? So this is from our packet. And if you don't have the packet or you don't have it printed off, that's okay. You can actually just do this on a piece of paper, and it doesn't even have to be a piece of notebook paper. It can just be a piece of scratch paper. So this has our essential question on it. Again, what causes cracks in the street and the sidewalk? So our activity today is going to be an inquiry activity. We are going to do some investigation, and it's going to be outside. So this will be kind of fun. We get to go outside, and hopefully you can do this on a nice sunny day. And our inquiry activity is called Weathered by Vegetation. So let's look and see what this says. It says you will investigate plants growing outside to collect evidence that plants cause weathering. So if we go back to this photograph that I took of my driveway, I wonder if a plant could have caused that. Now, if you think about that, think about how hard asphalt and concrete are. How in the world could a plant cause something like that to happen? So first I want you to make a prediction. Let's look down here under that, and it says, what evidence do you think you will observe that could show how vegetation or plants can cause weathering? What do you think you will see that could cause something like that in that picture that I showed you? Now again, you don't even have to have the packet. You could just do this on a regular piece of paper, and you can stop this video at any time where you need to write or investigate, and you can pick back up where you left off. And when you're ready, we're going to go down to the carry out an investigation and record data section. So let's look at these set of directions, and it says, for number 1, go outside and look for plants growing in paved areas such as your driveway or sidewalk. Now I want to stop right there because it's got something in bold print right here. It says, please make sure that you do this with an adult. We want you to be safe. So when you go outside, especially in areas where there may be cars, like your driveway or street or parking lot, please make sure that you have an adult with you. We want you to be safe, okay? Now let's look down at number 2. It says, look closely at how the plants are growing. So look around and see if you can see any plants growing in the area. Observe the effects the plants are having on that area. So if you do see cracks and bulges, like in the photograph I showed you, look around. Are there any plants around? Any small bushes or trees or anything like that? Number 3 says, record your observations in the table on the activity sheet. Be sure to make a note of the location where you find the plants. Again, just do this on a piece of paper. You can make your own table. Just draw your own table and you can fill it in. So be sure to put the location, so if it's on a sidewalk or your driveway or a parking lot, write that down and then write down what you observe. What do you see? And then number 4 says, try to locate 2 or more plants growing in different areas. Record your observations in the table. Now, when my class and I did this, after lunch, we went outside to the playground. Our playground is big and it has several paved areas, concrete areas, and it has a lot of trees and plants growing. So we found several spots where we saw cracks and bulges. So we were able to find a lot of different places, and they said, can we do more than 3? And you may be asking that too. Of course you can do more than 3. So just make your table bigger and write those in. And again, you can stop the video anytime you need to, and then come back when you're ready. Now, after you have collected your data outside, and you've made your prediction, we're gonna come to this part where it says communicate information. So number 7 says construct an explanation. Now, let's look at that word construct for a second. When I see that word construct, I think of construction. And construction means to build something, right? So we're building an explanation. We're putting it together. So it says, use the data that you have collected from outside with your adults. Explain how vegetation can cause weathering. So did you see any plants when you were collecting your data that could have caused cracks and bulges in the concrete and the paved areas? And then when you're ready to move down to number 8, it says, how did your prediction compare with what you observed? So did your prediction match up with what you actually saw? Or did you see something completely different from what you thought you would see? So take a second and fill those out. We want to use our data in science. When you collect data, you don't want to just put it away in a drawer somewhere when you're finished. You want to use it. You need to have a purpose for that. And in this case, we're trying to construct an explanation. We're going to tell people how this happens, how this weathering happens by vegetation. Now, once you have collected your data and you've written everything down, let's actually read about it. Now, this photograph that I've included here, I took this photograph at Fort Loudon Lake. And as you can see over here, beside the water, these rocks have been broken up. They have huge cracks in them. And the further you go down to the water, the smaller the rocks get. If you could actually look down in the water, you can see that they get smaller and smaller the deeper it goes. So these very large rocks have huge cracks in them. So they are almost about a foot wide. So you have to kind of jump over them or walk over them. It's pretty incredible. Now, they didn't start out like that. That was one huge slab of rock, and they've broken up over time because of physical weathering, which is what we're going to read about right now. So let's look over here under physical weathering, and it says rocks can change size and shape over time without changing their chemical properties by breaking apart. This process is called physical weathering. Now, let's talk about the difference between physical and chemical. But let's use a piece of paper first. So if you have a piece of paper and you burn it, it turns into ash. And that's a chemical change. The paper has turned into something completely different once it turns into ash. Once it's ash, you can't change it back into paper. Once it's ash, it's ash. There has been a chemical change. But if you take the piece of paper and you rip it in half, that is a physical change. The paper is still paper, it's just now in two different parts. And the same can be said for rocks. So rocks go through physical changes where they break apart, like in the photograph. They can also change chemically. So let's say you have an igneous rock, and over a long period of time under intense heat and pressure, it changes into a metamorphic rock. Now it has changed into a completely different kind of rock, and it can never go back. It can never change back into the rock that it used to be. If you take that same rock and you break it apart with a hammer into smaller pieces, that is a physical change. It's still the same kind of rock, it's just in smaller little chunks. That's the difference between chemical changes and physical changes. And physical changes are what we're talking about today. So we're down here where it has the word weathering highlighted. So now let's talk about the word weathering. You may be familiar with the word weather, which is the daily changes in our atmosphere. So that's from day to day, you've got your rain, snow, sleet, and hail, and your sunshine, and your wind, and your air pressure, all of those daily changes, that's our weather. Weathering is a bit different. So it says weathering is the breaking down of rocks into smaller pieces over a long period of time, like these rocks in the photograph. And then it goes on to say plants, animals, gravity, rain, flowing water, wind, and ice are just some of the main contributors to weathering. So let's talk about how vegetation contributes to weathering. So here's another photograph that I took. This one I took at Ozone Falls up on the Cumberland Plateau. And as you can see, you have several trees back over here on this side, and look at all of these roots. You see how the roots are all twisted and going into all of those smaller rocks. Those rocks used to be a part of this giant slab of rock right here on this side. They have broken away and they're getting smaller and smaller. The more those roots grow into and through those rocks and break them apart, the smaller they're going to get. So let's read about this. It says vegetation is the variety of plants in a region. The type of vegetation you may find in mountainous areas would be large pine, birch, and oak trees, while in a hot, sandy desert region, you would see plants like cacti and thorny bushes. Now, we don't live in a dry, sandy desert. We live more, well, we live in a valley, some of us, and then we've got our Appalachian Mountain Range and we've got our Cumberland Plateau. So in the mountainous areas, you've got those larger trees. So let's keep reading. And it says, in the mountains, the roots of larger types of vegetation can begin to grow into and through cracks in rocks. As this happens over time, the roots begin to pry the cracks open, breaking the rocks apart or into smaller pieces. Once rocks begin to shift and break apart, rock slides are more apt to happen due to the additional force of gravity pulling the rocks and soil down the mountainside. And you may have seen a rock slide as you're driving up the mountain or even up onto the plateau. So now let's shift to animals, how animals contribute to weathering. So it says animals that burrow into the ground contribute to physical weathering by loosening soil and breaking rocks apart as they move and dig. Some examples of burrowing animals include prairie dogs, like this cute little guy in the photograph, gophers, moles, and rabbits. Larger animals like bears are also known to burrow into the ground to build dens for hibernation. Even small animals like worms and ants that burrow into the soil can contribute to weathering. I think that's incredible that something as small as an ant can contribute to physical weathering and the breaking apart of rocks. Now, we have talked about it. We've looked at photographs, you've investigated, you've collected data, and we've read about it and you've written about it. So let's review a little bit now with some vocabulary. Our main vocabulary word today is weathering. And I have included our two pictures that we've talked about, the one that I took at Ozone Falls and the one from my driveway. Now, weathering means the breaking down of rocks into smaller pieces. So our essential question was, what causes cracks in sidewalks and in streets? So the concrete and the asphalt are made out of rock. And this crack in my driveway and this crack and this bulge, they were all caused by tree roots. So if you look in this top left-hand corner of my picture from my driveway, you'll see mulch. And in that mulch used to be a tree, a large tree. And over time, it grew and grew. And as it grew bigger, so did the roots. And the roots not only began to tear up my driveway, but they also began to tear up my garage floor, which is the base of my house. And so unfortunately, we had to cut the tree down, because when the base of your house begins to crack, that is not good. So unfortunately, we had to cut the tree down so that the roots would stop growing. Interesting fact, did you know that roots from a large tree can keep growing for up to 3 years after it's been cut down, because they still contain so much water? Isn't that interesting? Now, let's move on to the second word that I want to talk about, and that's erosion. So erosion is the weathering and removal of rock and soil. So after the weathering has broken down and broken apart the rocks into smaller pieces, and they start to shift and the soil starts to shift, erosion can happen. where those rocks and soil can be moved away or moved from one location to another. And if you look in this photograph, this is a lot of damage caused by erosion. So you can see that these houses here have been greatly affected by a landslide. Now, the landslide could have happened overnight, but what caused it did not happen overnight. So over a long period of time, all of this vegetation that you see in the photograph, all of that vegetation has roots. And those roots have grown into the soil and have loosened it, and they've broken apart rocks. And because there's so much vegetation in this area, that also tells me that it must rain quite a bit, because vegetation can't grow without precipitation. And I also see palm trees in this photograph, and where there are palm trees, that usually means that it's a warmer climate. So there's probably more rain than, say, snow. So if there's a lot of rain and you've got a lot of roots breaking apart rocks and soil, and you have a hill, there are going to be several factors contributing to this landslide. Because I want you to look at this photograph. Where did the houses and the trees and the rocks and the soil all move? Did they move up or did they move down? They moved down, right? So what force was that? That's the force of gravity pulling that stuff down the hill. So that is an unfortunate photograph of what could happen when there is quite a bit of erosion. Now, the last thing that we're going to do together today is we're going to look at an example test question. So if you want to take a second and read this, or even write it down and answer the question, you can pause the video and then start it back when you're ready. So let's read this question. It says, which is an example of a living thing that causes weathering? So we're going to go through all these answer choices together. A says, flowing water making rocks smooth. Well, that's a true statement. Flowing water does make rocks smooth over time. If you've ever gone down to the river and you find those great little stones that are round and smooth, the ones that are really good for skipping, those have been smoothed over time by the flowing water. But if you look back in the test question, it says, which is an example of a living thing causing weathering? Water is not a living thing. Sometimes the students in lower grades get a little confused with that because they think, well, water moves, so it must be alive, but it's not. Water is not a living thing. It moves, that's true, but there are a lot of things that move that aren't alive. Let's say a flag on a flagpole. The flag, when the wind blows, it moves, right? But the flag is made out of cotton. Someone sewed that together. It's not a living thing, and neither is water. So that can't be the right answer choice because we're looking for a living thing causing weathering. Let's move down to answer choice B. It says water and carbon dioxide changing limestone. Well, we've already said that water is not a living thing. Neither is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a gas. That's the gas that we release when we blow air out. We take in oxygen and we release carbon dioxide. So water and carbon dioxide are not living things. Water and carbon dioxide changing limestone is actually an example of a chemical change. So let's look at answer choice C. It says tree roots forcing open cracks in rocks. That's what we've been talking about today. Trees are living things, they're plants. So tree roots forcing open cracks in rocks, that is a living thing causing weathering. So answer choice C is probably the correct answer. But we always want to look at all of our answer choices just to make sure we didn't make a mistake or just to make sure we didn't misread the question, because that happens as well. So let's look down at D, and D says, freezing and melting causing cracks in rocks. Well, if we're talking about freezing and melting, we are talking about water. We've already decided that water is not a living thing. So that cannot be the answer either. So if you chose C as your choice, that is the correct answer. I do want to go back to D for just a second though. Let's talk about that. So water does get down into the cracks of rocks. And if it's cold, like on the top of a mountain, especially in the winter, that water freezes. And when water freezes, it expands. And when it expands, it has nowhere to go but out. So if that water is down in a crack and it freezes and it expands, it's going to crack that rock open. And over time, winter after winter after winter, the freezing and the cracking and the freezing and the cracking, that really contributes to weathering. However, the test question did ask for a living thing, so we are going to go with C. Now, that is the end of our lesson for today. I have pulled the screen back up for you to remind you that the packets that accompany this lesson can be found at the Knox County Schools website under the Student Resources tab. And if you don't have access to a printer, they will be given out at the meal distribution sites weekly from 10 to 12. So I want to thank you very much for joining me today. I had fun. I hope you did. And I do want to say that from all of us teachers, we miss being in our classrooms and we miss being with our students so much. And we want you to keep being safe, and hopefully we will see you very, very soon. Thank you so much for joining me today. Bye, guys.